Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Steve Ovitsky, the Executive Director of the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival, and on behalf of everyone involved in organizing this amazing symposium on music, the brain, medicine, and wellness, thank you for being here for the weekend. Thank you for attending this event, and I hope you had a wonderful time at last night's Bach concert, and I'm certain that those of you attending this evening's concert will have a great musical experience as well. We have two remarkable sessions being presented this afternoon. First, Dr. Ani Patel will talk about feeling the beat. Are humans unique? And the musicians working with him will be Angela Gabriel and Jim Goulden playing percussion. Angela is the festival's education director as well as a wonderful percussionist. And then Dr. David Huron will be presenting Music and Emotion, God of Feeling. And the brass quintet with him will be John Marciando and Christina McMurtry trumpets, Robert Buss horn, Micah Hood trombone, and Richard White tuba. Two really wonderful ways to expand on what we've been hearing for yesterday and today at the symposium. Thank you very much for being here, and here's Ani, Angela, and Jim.
You can play. Go, yeah. Go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me? So what you just heard was some wonderful drumming and an example of one of the most fundamental things in human music that we see in music all over the world is beat and a sense of an underlying pulse. And you did what humans all over the world do in every culture. You clapped along or tapped. In other places they might dance, but you moved to the beat. And I want to talk a little bit tonight about the science of that and some surprising things that we've learned about this seemingly simple behavior. Okay, so did you want to say, by the way, that was an example of a rhythm with one basic pulse, but there are more complex rhythms in the world.
Yeah, there's some music in Africa that has two pulses at once. And so if you want to, let's play, and so you can clap where you feel the pulse. That same groove that we were just playing, we could also play a different pulse with it that goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So try clapping this pulse. Okay, good. So now if you make a pattern with your hands like this, where you're going to take both hands together and go together, and then go right, left, right. So I'm making a mirror image to you. So together, right, left, right. Together, right, left, right. Together, right, left, right. Together. Now let's speed it up a little bit. Right, left, right. Together, right, left, right. Together, right, left, right. Together, good. Now keep that going. Together, right, left. Can we go a little bit faster too? Left, right, together, right, left, right. Together, right, left, right. One. Good. Now we'll keep doing that while I'm talking. Your right hand is playing 2. You want to play with that group? Play the 2? Okay. Your left hand's playing 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now you guys keep going. We'll play you an example of that groove that does that. Together, right, left, right. Together, right, left, right. Together, right, left, right.
So was that an African?
Yes.
Rhythm? That was.
And that's something, you can also, here's a good example of going back and forth between the 2 and the 3. You know the, I want to live in America, da 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 dun dun dun. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1. Good. And so what we did was, instead of going back and forth between the 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, we put them together. So you're going like this. So, and that's real common in Africa and Cuba.
That's great.
Even in the United States, you hear a lot of music.
Yeah. So that's a nice example of how it can get complicated when you have multiple beats going on. But just like a complicated building can be made out of bricks, where the individual brick is fairly simple, complicated rhythms can be made out of multiple pulses. But the basic thing that science, we're starting to study in neuroscience is the pulse. How do we even get that first sense of pulse to begin with, before we even get these layers of complexity? And that's where we've discovered some surprising things that I want to share with you tonight. So it occurs in every culture, this sense of a beat in some of the music. Not all music has it, but much does. And it's an underlying periodic pulse that organizes musical patterns. And you noticed as you clapped along, you weren't trying to clap to every note, you were clapping to this underlying steady pulse that you felt. It's what you tap your foot to. And it has a couple of key properties. You've already illustrated one. It's flexible with tempo. Some were faster, some of those rhythms were faster or slower, and people were able to easily speed up or slow down to match the tempo. And it's predictive, and that's really important. And let me just show you what I mean by that. And you can show this in the lab with a simple metronome. So if you have people come into the lab, and this is very easy for people, they don't need any musical training, children will do it without any trouble. You just have a metronome clicking along. Imagine these vertical lines are the clicks of a metronome, and you just say tap with the metronome. And what everybody will do spontaneously is tap along, and they'll actually tap in anticipation of each beat. So those little red balls are where people actually tapped, or a person actually tapped. And you can see it's a little bit ahead of the ideal coincidence time, which is shown by the black circle. And this comes naturally to everybody. So in fact, you have a mental model of time in your head that you're keeping to use to move, because you're moving predictably. You're not reacting to the beats, you're anticipating them. Now, this basic sense of a beat seems to be very widespread. In fact, people have argued it's universal, but there are possibly some people who don't feel it at all. And, perhaps in this room there was somebody who, during that exercise, was sort of wondering what's going on. I'm just imitating the person next to me, but I don't feel anything. I don't feel any inner sense of beat. And this is something that scientists are actually trying to find out about right now. And there's now at least one published case of a person that seems like this. They do fine with a metronome, but they completely have no sense of a beat when you introduce anything more complex like those rhythms or music. And how do you identify such people? One thing we've done in our lab is come up with a test, and I'd like to try it on you right now. which doesn't involve clapping, because maybe you feel a beat, but you just don't like to clap, or it's hard for you to clap to the beat, but inside you feel it. How would you find such people and distinguishing them from people who just don't feel it at all? Well, we came up with a listening test, which is called the beat alignment test, which is now being used in our lab and several other labs around the country. And this is a test where you just hear music, ordinary music, and we superimpose a sequence of beeps on the music. And your job is just to listen, and at the end of the sequence, you tell us, did the beep sound on the beat or not? So let me play you an example, and you try and decide for yourself. So here's the first one. So that was courtesy of Professor Harold Hill. Did you, and what did you think about those beeps? On? Okay, what about this one? Yeah, people are looking kind of grossed out. How about
Your toast is done.
how about this one? Not good. Not good. And so this actually even works with babies. We have a study where we played this to 6-month-old babies, and they will look longer at the sound and be more interested if the beeps are on the beat than if the beeps are off the beat. So this is a test that we're trying to use to find people who have no sense of beat. Because if you have no sense of beat, those are all just going to sound like music with some weird beeps superimposed on them. You won't be able to discriminate. And there may be such people, but in fact, there's a case of one, but do you think, Angela, that these people are hopeless, or do you think like you're a teacher, do you think you could take somebody like that?
I think I would really enjoy the challenge, yeah, because I've never come across anybody that couldn't improve. I mean, and I've come across some pretty challenged people, yeah. But they all got better, and they all improved. So I think it's something that it builds as we get it in so many different ways.
So you don't think there's any truth, like there's color blindness, and there are people that are just colorblind, and you can teach them all you want about color, but they're never going to get a sense of color.
That's true, but most of us don't usually practice figuring out what's red. We either know it or we don't, I guess.
Yeah.
And with rhythm, you practice it. It's something that you have to coordinate and you get better at.
Okay. So you think everybody's
I think everybody's capable of improvement. Well, what about, like, imagine if you have someone that if they can walk. There's an African saying that says, if you can walk, you can dance. If you can talk, you can sing. Okay. And so I feel like even people who might walk with a limp, they're still making a pattern. We're surrounding ourselves with physical patterns all the time. And so, in fact, if we look at, you want to show them? Will you walk for us? Just walk normal. Okay, so if you walk. So walk, so we've got. Imagine what it would be like if you walked without rhythm or without a pulse. You walk and I'll play to you. I think the only person I've ever seen walk like that was John Cleese. So I think if everybody can, anyone who can walk at least has some kind of pulse.
Well, that's a really good point, and actually it's perfect lead-in to the next idea, which is we walk. When any human, any animal that walks produces a steady beat in the sense of a rhythm that they make. But how widespread is the sense of a beat and your ability to feel a beat in sound? Is it in every person? I mean, it's tempting to think it is, because biology is full of rhythms. We talked about walking, but there's also the rhythm of the heart. The brain has many rhythms inside it. So it's tempting to think this is just innate in us, and perhaps even in other animals. And Darwin actually believed that. In The Descent of Man, he has a passage about the evolution of music. And one of the things he said was, the perception, if not the enjoyment, of musical cadences, by which he means melodies, and of rhythm, is probably common to all animals, and no doubt depends on the common physiological nature of their nervous systems. In other words, he felt this is just something really basic about how the brain works, and it should be in us, in everyone, and perhaps even in other animals. So now I'll turn to talking about some of the surprising things that science has discovered about it. And the first one leads directly from this idea of Darwin's and others that it should be widespread. So this, as I mentioned, it's super easy for people to tap to a metronome. Even people that are challenged by rhythms, these more complicated rhythms, if you give them a metronome to tap to, they seem to do fine. So a laboratory in Mexico decided they wanted to study the brain basis of this because it's easy for humans. It's a kind of timing behavior, and they were interested in timing in animals. And they study rhesus monkeys in their lab, so they decided to train a monkey to do this. And they thought this would be easy. In fact, every monkey neurobiologist I've talked to about this has said, oh yeah, that's not hard. I can train my monkey to tap to a metronome. They're often very proud of what they can get their monkeys to do. And this one doesn't seem like it's going to be that challenging. I mean, they get their monkeys to do all kinds of crazy stuff in the lab for neurobiological purposes. A colleague of mine got one to wear virtual reality goggles and use a joystick to control a circle, a cursor to trace circles on a computer screen. This is not a natural behavior for monkeys in the wild, but they can learn how to do this. So tapping to the beat, no problem. Okay, so they started with their first monkey, and they trained this monkey, and the monkey training is hard, and it takes time. But so they trained him 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, and they expected it to take a couple weeks, and a month goes by, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year goes by, and the monkey is not learning the task. They said, okay, well, maybe we just got a dumb one. Let's start with another one. So monkey number 2 comes in the lab. Same deal, 6 months, a year. Monkey number 3, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and they're starting to wonder what's going on. But the monkeys finally did acquire an ability to tap to the metronome. But what they did after a lot of training was that they tapped always a couple of 100 milliseconds after the metronome click. That's largely a responsive stimulus response kind of reaction, as opposed to what we do and children do with no special instruction the first time you bring them into the lab, which is they tap in coincidence and right on the metronome beeps. So that was a big surprise. It suggested that maybe this is not as simple as it seems from an external perspective. Maybe this is more complicated and interesting. And that leads to the second surprise about brain imaging. When you look at the brain and you actually take pictures of a brain as it's feeling a beat. Now this is people in a brain scanner like an MRI machine, and this is a picture of a brain. The nose would be down at the bottom and the back of the head in the back, and sort of a cutaway so you can see sort of some of the internal regions as well. We see certain areas are activated when people report that they feel a beat in a rhythm. Now again, they're not moving, they're just saying they feel the beat. And interestingly, not only do you get the hearing regions or the auditory regions, which you'd expect because it's an auditory phenomenon, you also see regions that, everything cool? Yeah. That have to do with planning movement, motor planning regions. These are regions that normally plan movements. So it's as if your motor system is somehow activated and used to analyze sound when there's beat involved. Nietzsche said we listen to music with our muscles, and this is neurobiological evidence that in a sense that's true. We analyze sound with our motor system when there's a beat involved, and perhaps that has to do with these, making these predictions. Maybe that part of the motor system is involved in making these temporal predictions that allow us to land right on the beat.
So you're saying that when you hear a beat and you're just listening to it, that your body's actually something is being triggered as if you're moving.
Sort of an internal movement almost. And maybe that's why it's so natural to move, because in a sense your body's already planning movement as a way of predicting the beats. And you just have to kind of let that connect to the real motor system, and then you're off and running and actually moving. So that was the second surprise. The third has to do with how powerful this connection between music and rhythm and movement is. It not only affects all of us, it affects people with neurological disorders. And there have been a number of wonderful talks at this symposium that I've been attending on music and the brain here in Santa Fe, where there have been research on Parkinson's patients. And Parkinson's patients will often freeze and have great trouble starting to move and continuing to move with a steady gait. They'll be unstable, they might be frozen. And it's been observed for a while now, including by people like Oliver Sacks and his colleagues, that music with rhythm helps these people move. And now this is starting to be studied neurologically, and it looks really promising as a potential form of therapy. In fact, it's already been designed and used as a therapy by Dr. Michael Tout and his colleagues and shown to be efficacious, though we still need to understand the mechanisms better. But to just kind of illustrate this for you, Dr. Connie Tomeno, who's done a lot of this work at the Beth Abraham in New York, kindly shared this video of a patient walking to the beat of music. This is a Parkinson's patient. You'll see she's frozen at the beginning of the video, and she walks very, very slowly. And watch what happens when the music comes on, and pay attention to the rhythm of her steps in relation to the beat.
If they're rare, you want to start probably facing the other way as you go.
So it's striking, and what's exciting about what's happening now is that this sort of clinical observation is now getting connected to basic research. And we're hoping in the next decade we'll actually understand the networks in the brain that are allowing this to happen, which will allow us, of course, to improve the therapies. So finally, the last thing I want to talk about that's been kind of surprising in this whole domain of beat and brain is this issue of other species. The fact that monkeys can't do it came as a real surprise, because we think in some ways their brains are very similar to ours. But it turns out we are not alone. We're not the only species that has a sense of a beat, but it's not other monkeys, it's not other primates. It turns out to be birds. And this story starts in a curious way, with a parrot being dropped off at a bird shelter. Now, this is a sulfur-crested cockatoo. His name is Snowball. He was about 11 when he was dropped off at the bird shelter. And these big birds often do get dropped off at bird shelters because people get them as pets. They are very demanding socially. They really want your attention all the time, and they live about 80 years. And it's said that they have the personality of a 5-year-old. So I love my 5-year-old, who's now an 8-year-old, but I'm glad she's growing up. So they get dropped off at bird shelters, and when the owner dropped him off, he dropped him off with a CD and said the bird really likes to dance to this music. And the owner of the bird shelter just put on the CD to humor the owner, and the bird started to dance. And she took a video of this, put it on the internet, it went viral, and somebody sent it to me and said, well, you know, you've been theorizing about music and beat and whether or not other species can do it. What do you think of this? And I said, this potentially is real. And, but of course, it's a YouTube video, so you don't know what's happening off camera. Maybe the owner's dancing and the bird is just imitating. So I immediately emailed her and said, would you do a real experiment with us? And thankfully, she agreed, and we started to do studies of this bird, Snowball. And we just did the first study, was the obvious one. We took the song we saw him dancing to, which is Everybody by the Backstreet Boys, and we slowed it down and sped it up to 11 different speeds using a computer, so it didn't change the pitch, just the tempo. And we played these to him. He'd never heard these before. And we made sure nobody was dancing off camera, and we took video, brought it back to the lab, turned off the sound, analyzed all his movements with the computer, extracted the beat times with the computer, did all the statistics to see if he was really on the beat. And it turns out he really did sense a beat and was able to dance to the beat at different tempi, sort of like we do. It was the first case of another animal that has this ability. And I think it's because he has a certain kind of brain organization that we have that allows us to mimic sound. Because we are the only animal with language, true language with grammar and semantics, but not the only animals that mimic sound. Parrots mimic sound, dolphins can do it, and this creates certain special circuits between the hearing and motor centers of the brain that I think lay the foundation for beat perception. So that predicts that only those kinds of animals can do this, and we're testing that further now. So let me show you a couple of videos of Snowball, and these are just a couple of trials from the experiment. This is a little bit slower than the original tempo of the song, and this illustrates these episodes of synchrony. So, you know, it's hard, you know, we're taught not to anthropomorphize, but do you think he's enjoying himself? I mean, it's hard not to believe that. And he never does this. This is not a trained bird. This is not a circus trick. He doesn't get food as a reward for this or anything. You know, you turn on the music, and especially if his owner dances with him, which is what he loves, he'll do this every time. And I think it's a social bonding thing between him and his owner, actually.
Well, you know, I was going to ask you about that, because it seems like the animals that you mentioned that also have beat are very social animals, and it seems to me like beat is kind of established in human existence socially.
Yes.
You have rhythms for birth and death and you know, everything in between.
Right. I think that's such a good observation, and we'll come back to that at the end, the social role of all this. But yeah, dolphins are highly social. These parrots are very social. They have long-term pair bonds in the wild. And I don't think that's a coincidence that the animals that also do this also are highly social. So one more clip from the study. This is the fastest. This is 20% faster than the song than he'd ever heard before. Again, you know, he hasn't been rehearsing. This is just what he heard and what he did. And it's too fast for him, and see what happens at the end. He figures out a solution to that problem. Rockin, snowball. That's just one of his. He has an incredible number of moves. He does actually. We've documented that now. He has like 13 different dance moves, and these are just a couple that he seems to pull them out of a hat. So anyway, he really does synchronize, and we're not alone. And he's not unique. I mean, this is a big question anytime you have a spectacular demonstration of something by one animal. But luckily, another group at Harvard looked at a number of other animals and found a bunch of other birds that did this. Parrots, all parrots, which again, I think is very important, Angela, in terms of this social thing, because like a lot of birds will just mate and then disperse and live alone for the rest of the year. Parrots live in groups and social groups year-round, and maybe that's one reason they have this desire to move in time with a partner, although they can do it by themselves. And now this is actually being studied in the lab. A lab in Japan has trained parrots to move to tap to a metronome in the lab, which is something the monkeys couldn't do. So let's end with this question of why we do it. And Angela, you've already touched on this, is Darwin's idea about music in general, really, was that it was a sexual display, that like birdsong, which is used to attract mates, that humans evolved music early in our evolution, before we even had language, as a way of attracting mates. Dancing and singing was attractive to the opposite sex, and that was his original theory of its function.
It worked with him. He's my husband.
So you wrote, musical notes and rhythm were first acquired by the male or female progenitors of mankind for the sake of charming the opposite sex. So that's one theory. But there's now a different idea that's now emerging, and it's leading to interesting experiments, actually. And it's all about this social thing. Because as you've observed, this kind of activity of synchronizing and to music and to sound often happens in groups, in social groups. You dance typically with other people. You don't turn on the stereo and dance in your living room. Most of the time you'll go out with somebody or you go to a club. And drumming is communal in most cultures. And so one idea is emerging is that early in human evolution, this was a way, synchrony with other people was a way of kind of building bonds, social bonds, and feeling more aligned with them. And now that's inspiring a number of experiments showing that if people synchronize with each other, they're more likely to be cooperative afterwards on non-musical tasks. This even influences children down to, we saw a video yesterday of 14-month-olds, and if they moved synchronously with somebody else, they're more likely to be helpful if a situation arose where somebody needed help. It's really quite remarkable. And I think this has interesting implications for social development. So I think we'll end there, but we thought we'd end with something fun, sort of illustrating this idea of the social aspect of sync. Last time you did synchrony at the beginning of this presentation, you all clapped, but you did it by yourself. But I think Angela has some interesting ideas for how to make this a little more social.
Okay, so this works best if you're sitting close to someone. So if you're away from a group, maybe you can scoot in together and hold your left hand with your palm up. If you guys scoot this way, then you'll even have more of it. Yeah, so if you can get everybody in the row together. So have your palm up, left hand palm up. And then your right hand, you're going to take and pat your neighbor's hand that's up, like that. So we'll keep a pulse that way. Gently. So now see, you're all better friends.
All right, thanks. Now we'll have David Huron come and tell you a little bit about musical chills.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.